Have you ever wondered what the impenetrable Amazon jungle really hides? For decades, this region was considered a completely barren green hell, where no civilization could survive.
But what if I told you that all this time, we've been looking in the wrong place?
British Colonel Percy Fawcett decided to challenge the entire scientific world. Armed with secret maps from closed archives and a truly unyielding will, he set off for a place from which no one returns. It wasn't just a trip, it was a deadly race to find evidence of the existence of the great city of Z.
Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because what his expedition discovered still has historians arguing until they're hoarse.
You'll learn how a fanatical obsession with ancient ruins turned into the most terrifying and vast geographical mystery in human history. What if everything you were taught is outdated? For a long time, the history of South America was presented as a chronicle of utterly wild and undeveloped territories. British topographer Percy Fawcett set out to completely shatter this convenient academic dogma. He spent long hours poring over the yellowed pages of tattered reports in closed archives. His attention was constantly drawn to the accounts of early explorers describing massive stone structures. Fawcett was not a dreamer detached from reality or a mere adventurer. He was a strict career officer accustomed to ironclad military discipline. His primary tools of the trade included heavy theodolites and complex navigational tables. He trusted only hard facts and mathematically verified geographic coordinates.
It was precisely this cold, analytical mind that led him to believe in the existence of a vast settlement.
The colonel based his conclusions on many years of experience demarcating borders in South America. He personally drew up detailed maps of the continent's most inaccessible regions. During these long expeditions, he found strange artifacts of perfect geometric shape. The pottery he found was strikingly different from the primitive artifacts of known tribes. These discoveries became the first tangible evidence of his bold theory. Gradually, the scattered facts came together to form a single logical picture of enormous scale. Fawcett concluded that the jungle concealed the remains of a highly developed society. He named this hypothetical place the Lost City of Z. In his imagination, it was a developed center with thousands of inhabitants and complex architecture. This idea became the main driving force of his entire future life. Preparing for the search required a thorough study of logistics and routes. The officer began gathering information on river systems and seasonal climate changes. He calculated the speed of river currents and the carrying capacity of narrow trails. Every kilometer of the route was analyzed for the presence of clean drinking water and edible plants. The colonel sought to minimize any unpredictable factors. In London, Fawcett faced serious resistance from the conservative scientific community. Respected scientists openly mocked the idea of an advanced civilization in impenetrable forests.
They argued that the harsh climate simply would not allow for the construction of large settlements.
The British Royal Geographical Society refused to fund such a risky venture. The officer had to seek support from private investors and newspaper magnates. The lack of funding only strengthened the tenacious British explorer's resolve. He began publishing sensational articles in the press, stoking public interest in his theory. Journalists eagerly picked up the story of the mysterious city and its vast treasures. The articles established Fawcett's reputation as a fearless pioneer and attracted the necessary funds. Public opinion gradually began to swing in his favor. Having secured the necessary funds, the colonel set about purchasing specialized equipment. He ordered lightweight yet sturdy canoes capable of navigating rapids. Great attention was paid to canned foods that could withstand the tropical heat. Navigation instruments were additionally protected against the damaging effects of moisture. The expedition was equipped to the highest standards of the time. The team of explorers was deliberately kept to a minimum. Fawcett believed that large groups were too slow and required enormous food supplies. He opted for a mobile and inconspicuous group capable of moving quickly. The team consisted of the most resilient and dedicated individuals. They were ready to unquestioningly follow the commander's orders under any circumstances. Each new purchase brought the day of departure into the Green Labyrinth closer. The officer publicly declared his complete readiness to conquer uncharted territories. This step cut off all avenues for retreat or cancellation of the expedition. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Fawcett's obsession with this idea? Share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about. Fawcett's trump card was a forgotten document found in the National Library of Rio de Janeiro. This text is known to historians by the dry number manuscript 512. The document was written by a Portuguese treasure hunter in the mid-18th century. The pages contained a detailed description of a huge abandoned city with stone arches. The Portuguese author described in detail the wide cobblestone streets and multi-story buildings. The text mentioned statues of unknown gods and perfectly square plazas. Fawcett translated every line of this old report with maniacal precision. He compared landmarks from the manuscript with his own maps of the region.
The matches were too precise to be mere fabrications by a weary traveler.
The manuscript became a sort of compass for planning the route of the new expedition. The colonel spent hours studying the description of the mountain range behind which the city was hidden. He searched modern maps for geological formations that matched this description. His analysis narrowed the search area down to a specific region in the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso. That was where the British team was to head. An important aspect of the document was the mention of symbols carved on stone slabs. Fawcett sketched these symbols in his field journal for further study. He hoped to find similar petroglyphs along the riverbanks as they made their way forward. These symbols served as a kind of road sign pointing to the main destination. They transformed an abstract search into a concrete navigational task. Many skeptics considered the manuscript to be the product of the Portuguese expedition's hallucinations. Fawcett refuted these attacks with sound reasoning, citing the accuracy of the topographical descriptions. A fabricator could not have described the system of waterfalls and river rapids so accurately. The text contained details that could only be known through first-hand observation. This confidence was conveyed to investors and team members. The manuscript became a tool for managing public opinion in London. The officer released information to the press in measured doses, constantly keeping the intrigue alive. Newspapers printed mysterious symbols, attracting the attention of thousands of readers. The story of the manuscript added both mystical and scientific weight to the expedition. Funding continued to flow thanks to the skillful handling of this source. Gradually, the document became an indisputable authority, even for the colonel himself. If the actual terrain did not match the text, he looked for errors in modern maps. He sincerely believed that Portuguese explorers had found traces of the lost city of Z. This unshakable belief made Fawcett deaf to the warnings of local guides. He ignored advice to steer clear of dangerous areas. The manuscript's informational value lay not only in its descriptions of buildings, it also contained information about abandoned gold and silver mines. It was precisely the prospect of finding valuable resources that finally convinced investors to risk their capital. Scientific interest was closely intertwined with the thirst for quick profits.
The expedition acquired the status of a major geopolitical project.
Fawcett carefully kept a copy of the document in a special waterproof case. He always kept this case with him as the most valuable item in his arsenal. The diary with excerpts became his main reference guide when making difficult decisions. The officer consulted it at every stop, adjusting their course. A century-old text guided the actions of the modern British team. The document played a decisive role in determining the final destination of the route. The British knew exactly the coordinates of the place where they were to make their discovery. How wise do you think it was to rely on a single old text? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the expedition encountered the first serious obstacles on its path. What they found in the old archives. The starting point of the route was the small Brazilian town of Cuiabá on the edge of civilization. From there, the three-person expedition set out into completely unexplored territory. From the very first days, the journey turned into an exhausting struggle against the landscape. Thick thickets of thorny vines blocked the path, requiring constant work with a machete. Their pace was catastrophically slow due to the dense vegetation. The trees stood so close together that it was impossible to squeeze through. The explorers had to literally hack a green tunnel through the solid wall of the jungle. Advancing just 1 kilometer sometimes took a full day of exhausting labor. Clothing tore quickly, snagging on sharp thorns and sturdy branches. The climate became the second severe test for the British team. The stifling heat combined with 100% humidity, making it difficult to breathe. Sweat wouldn't dry on his skin, making every movement a struggle. The dense forest canopy completely blocked out the sun, creating a perpetual green twilight.
Under such conditions, navigating by the stars or the sun was practically impossible.
Magnetic anomalies seriously complicated the use of navigational instruments. Compass needles periodically veered off course, causing Fawcett to doubt the chosen route. The colonel had to spend hours on complex recalculations and verifying coordinates. Any mistake under such conditions meant getting lost in endless, impenetrable wilderness. Tension within the small group began to rise rapidly. The ground beneath their feet constantly turned into sticky, deep mud. Their boots slipped on wet roots, threatening fractures with every careless step. Crossing small streams took a long time due to the boggy and unstable banks. The weight of the backpacks with equipment seemed twice as heavy due to the constant dampness. Physical exhaustion gradually built up, slowing the team's overall pace. Fawcett maintained strict discipline, not allowing the team to relax. He set a rigid schedule for movement and short rest stops. The food ration was strictly controlled to stretch the canned food supplies for as long as possible. In the evenings, the officer made everyone clean their tools and check the packaging for leaks. This routine inspection helped maintain psychological stability in the wild. The locals refused to accompany the expedition beyond certain boundaries. They spoke of impassable swamps and territories from which no one had ever returned. Fawcett ignored these stories, dismissing them as the usual superstitions of an illiterate population. Left without guides, the British could rely only on their maps and instruments. Their isolation from the outside world became absolute. Navigation turned into an extremely complex geometric problem. They had to regularly climb the tallest trees to scan the horizon. These risky ascents drained their last reserves of strength, but offered a chance to correct their course.
Landmarks spotted from above were recorded in the logbook with precision down to the degree.
Every decision to turn was made after lengthy calculations. Despite all the difficulties, the colonel radiated unshakable confidence in success. His calmness acted as a powerful stabilizing factor for his teammates. He was the first to grab a machete and the last to lie down to rest after checking the instruments. The commander's personal example kept the team from falling into despair. They stubbornly pressed forward, leaving civilization farther and farther behind. Every kilometer they covered raised the stakes in this dangerous game. Turning back became just as difficult as moving forward. If you enjoy this historical investigation, be sure to like this video. Guess what happened next? The expedition reached a boundary that local cartographers had simply marked as a blank spot. Fawcett named his final base camp Dead Horse Camp in honor of a previous expedition. It was from here that the colonel sent his last letter via local couriers. In the message, he asked that no rescue missions be organized in the event of their disappearance. This decision was a classic burning of bridges before a decisive push. Declining rescue meant that the team was taking full responsibility for their own lives. Fawcett realized that any search party would face the same enormous risks. He did not want to be the cause of other people's deaths in these harsh lands. The British team stepped into the unknown, leaving behind their last reliable link to civilization. Crossing the watershed became the first serious logistical crisis. The terrain changed dramatically, turning into a series of steep rocky ascents and deep gorges. Carrying heavy boxes of equipment over slippery rocks required incredible effort. Ropes frayed and wooden boxes cracked from constant impacts against the rocks. Their pace dropped to just a few hundred meters a day. A sudden rise in the river's water level caught the team off guard. Torrential rains in the mountains caused a massive flood in the valley where they were located. The raging current swept up some of the food supplies left on the bank and carried them away. Attempts to salvage the valuable canned goods proved futile due to the immense speed of the current. The expedition suddenly lost a significant portion of its food supply. The loss of supplies instantly shifted the entire balance of power in this struggle. Fawcett had to radically revise the daily food rations. Portions were reduced to the bare minimum, sufficient only to sustain vital functions. Hunger became a constant companion for the explorers, dulling their attention and slowing their reactions. The situation rapidly deteriorated from strict control to a growing crisis. The search for alternative food sources took up precious daylight hours. The researchers had to spend hours gathering edible roots and fruits. Unfamiliar vegetation posed a risk of poisoning, requiring extreme caution. Every nut or root found was carefully inspected before consumption. Securing food became more important than making progress along the route. Navigating the terrain became critically difficult due to the constant fog. A thick white veil enveloped the forest every night and lingered until noon. Visibility was reduced to a few meters, turning the forest into a gray labyrinth. Compass bearings had to be taken literally blind, relying on the colonel's intuition. A miscalculation meant going in circles through the same places. Footwear and clothing began to rapidly deteriorate from constant moisture and mud. The thick leather of the boots rotted and split at the seams, leaving the feet unprotected. Repairing the equipment took up every evening, requiring ingenuity and patience. Instead of thread, they used strong vine fibers and thin strips of bark. The British gradually lost their civilized appearance, blending into the jungle. Despite the dire situation, Fawcett refused to turn back. He methodically plotted every bend of the river and every new hill on the map. His obsession with the goal overpowered his instinct for self-preservation and drowned out the voice of reason. His companions obeyed his will, under immense psychological pressure from their commander. The expedition turned into a march for survival in pursuit of a phantom city. The balance of power had finally shifted in favor of the wild and merciless wilderness. Do you think the loss of supplies could have been avoided? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the expedition crossed the boundary of the known world and faced a full-scale catastrophe. The scale of the threat took on entirely new, overwhelming dimensions. The terrain became unpredictable, alternating between deep, swampy lowlands and sharp, rocky ridges. Crossing the swamps drained an enormous amount of energy due to the viscous, sucking silt. Every step was a struggle. Their legs sank knee-deep into the foul-smelling sludge. Moving forward felt more like a slow and agonizing struggle. The bulky equipment had turned from a lifeline into a heavy burden. Theodolites and toolboxes constantly got caught in the dense tangles of branches. The researchers had to unpack and repack their backpacks several times a day. The physical strain led to the complete depletion of the body's reserves. The men moved forward solely on the strength of their will and the colonel's orders. The incessant tropical downpours exacerbated an already dire situation. Water poured from the sky in a solid wall, washing away trails and landmarks. It became absolutely impossible to start a fire, as there was simply no dry firewood left. The lack of a fire meant it was impossible to dry clothes or cook hot meals. The cold and dampness penetrated deep under the skin, robbing them of their last shreds of comfort. It was under these conditions that the expedition suffered its most devastating logistical loss. Another river surge proved fatal for the small homemade raft. The raft capsized on rocks hidden beneath the water, scattering its cargo across the turbulent current. The water swallowed up the spare compasses and the case containing detailed maps of the area forever. This disaster deprived the British of their main advantage over nature. The loss of navigational instruments meant instant and complete blindness in the Green Labyrinth. Fawcett could no longer determine his location with mathematical precision. The only remaining compass had a damaged glass and gave a huge margin of error. Confidence gave way to desperate attempts to guess the correct direction by the sun. The control system that the officer had built up over years collapsed in an instant. The psychological pressure on the team reached a critical and devastating level. The lack of precise coordinates bred a sense of utter disorientation and isolation. His teammates began to doubt the correctness of the route chosen by the colonel. Quiet conversations over empty tin cans escalated into open discontent. Fawcett's authority was put to its first serious test. The lack of food began to affect the researchers' cognitive functions. Reaction times slowed, memory lapses appeared, and coordination was impaired. Making the simplest decisions took an unforgivably long time. Fawcett spent hours trying to convince the team to take just a few more steps. The expedition was slowly but surely sinking into a state of complete numbness. Instead of an organized trek, the journey turned into a chaotic wandering. The group often retraced their own steps, making huge, pointless circles. Nature mercilessly confused them, offering false trails and non-existent clearings in the thicket. Dense vegetation closed in behind them, cutting off the path to safety. The forest swallowed them up slowly, methodically, and with utter indifference. Each new day was an exact replica of the previous one, erasing any sense of time. The researchers stopped making regular entries in their field journals. Survival in that very moment became the only important task. Dreams of a great archaeological discovery dissolved into the thick Amazonian fog. All that remained was mud, hunger, and an endless green wall. The turning point had passed, leaving the team face to face with inevitability. The stakes had soared to their highest, but they had no trump cards left to play. What they don't want you to see. The complete lack of landmarks forced Fawcett to resort to desperate methods of navigation. He tried to determine his direction by the way the moss grew on the trunks of the giant trees. This method proved completely ineffective in the equatorial climate. The trees were uniformly covered with vegetation on all sides, obscuring true north. An inventory of the remaining supplies revealed a dire situation. There were only enough canned goods left for a few days of extreme rationing. The spare boots had rotted, and the ropes had frayed into thin, useless strands. The rifle cartridges had become damp, making it impossible to hunt small game. The team had lost even the theoretical possibility of replenishing their food supplies. Moving forward in a straight line became physically impossible due to the terrain. An insurmountable barrier in the form of a deep and wide canyon loomed before the explorers. Descending the sheer, slippery cliffs without reliable ropes meant certain death. They had to find a detour, which required a tremendous amount of time and energy. The group was forced to turn east, completely veering off their original course. Weather conditions continued to test the British team's endurance. Sudden temperature swings exhausted their bodies, which could not adapt quickly enough to the changes. The stifling heat of the day gave way abruptly to the piercing cold of the night. The lack of warm clothing and dry blankets turned their nights into a veritable ordeal. Sleep became short and restless, failing to provide the necessary rest and recovery. The psychological breakdown of the team became an obvious fact even to the colonel himself. His orders were carried out slowly, with obvious reluctance and apathy. The eyes of his teammates revealed emptiness and complete detachment from what was happening. Fawcett's iron discipline no longer worked under conditions of total exhaustion. The expedition's structure had collapsed, turning the group into 3 scattered wanderers. Fawcett's attempts to boost morale with stories about the city sounded absurd. Talk of gold and great discoveries elicited only irritated silence. Reality, in the form of empty stomachs and worn-out feet, dashed any fantasies. Only the most obsessed colonel still believed in the lost city of Z. His companions wanted only one thing: to find a way out of this green hell. They began to discard heavy equipment to at least somewhat speed up their pace. First, broken theodolites and empty metal boxes were left behind in the bushes. Then, it was the turn of personal belongings, heavy jackets, and spare tools. The backpacks became lighter, but this did not give them any extra speed or strength. The abandoned items became silent witnesses to their inevitable downfall. The surrounding forest seemed like a living, hostile organism tightening its grip. The sounds of falling trees and the crackling of snapping branches terrified them at night. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Every rustle made them shudder with tension. Paranoia and fear became constant inhabitants of their modest camp. The British had finally transformed from confident explorers into hunted prey. The expedition had completely lost control of its fate and direction. Fawcett was no longer a leader, but merely one of many lost in the jungle. Their progress now depended solely on the whims of nature and the terrain. Do you think they should have continued on after such catastrophic losses? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the Green Labyrinth closed in on the team. The Amazon methodically and mercilessly narrowed the space around the exhausted British. Thick bamboo thickets formed a solid wall that was impossible to bypass. They had to chop down the stems with machetes, expending their last bits of precious energy. In a day, they managed to make no more than a couple hundred meters through these barriers. It was a true siege, where endless tree trunks stood in place of walls. Their food supply had dwindled to a few randomly found roots and a handful of nuts. Digesting such coarse food took more energy than it provided. The explorers' faces had grown gaunt, their cheekbones covered in thin, pale skin. Their movements had become mechanical, resembling the actions of poorly controlled puppets. Their physical bodies were succumbing to the onslaught of the hostile environment. Navigation had turned into a completely meaningless ritual with a broken compass. Fawcett continued to look at the needle, but no longer made any notes. The journal was nearly full, but the last pages contained only fragmentary phrases. The coordinates had vanished, giving way to descriptions of endless rain and mud. The expedition's documentary chronicle had turned into a diary of despair. Nature began to destroy even the few shelters they found. A sudden rise in the water table flooded the cave they had chosen for the night. They had to evacuate hastily in the dark, throwing the remains of their belongings into the water. The men spent the night right on the wet ground, huddled together with their backs pressed against one another. In the morning, they struggled to get up to set off once more into the unknown. Communication within the group was reduced to short, one-word phrases. Conversation required energy, which they were desperately lacking. Commands were given through gestures. Understanding occurred through glances. It was a silent brotherhood of doomed people, bound by a shared, fatal mistake. The colonel walked ahead, mechanically hacking a path to nowhere. The forest seemed to mock their futile attempts to find a way out. Trails that seemed like a lifeline suddenly ended at deep chasms or raging rivers. Each such obstacle meant a long trek back and the search for a new path. This labyrinth had no center and no exit for the exhausted people. They found themselves trapped in the largest natural prison on the planet. The explorers' clothes had turned into dirty rags hanging from their thin shoulders. These scraps offered no protection from the cold or the prickly plants. Their hands and faces were covered in deep scratches and caked on black mud. Outwardly, they bore little resemblance to the proud British gentlemen they once were. The jungle had erased all social and cultural differences. The final days of their expedition are not recorded in any document. All that is known is that they moved eastward, deeper and deeper into the unknown. Their pace slowed to a crawl. Every step was a feat. Fawcett did not abandon his goal, even when it became unattainable. His stubbornness was the main reason for their irreversible descent into the thicket. The Green Siege ended with the complete surrender of human capabilities to the forces of nature. The forest swallowed the expedition, leaving not a single trace. The British vanished into the vast expanse of trees and swamps. Their story ended, but the legend of the Lost City was just beginning. The silence that followed the expedition's disappearance stretched on for many years. The lack of news was initially seen as normal for such long expeditions. However, as the months passed, anxiety in London began to grow. Fawcett's wife continued to believe in a successful outcome and refused to accept the worst. But the scientific community began to grasp the scale of the tragedy that had unfolded in the jungle. The first rescue missions were organized only several years after his disappearance. These were large-scale, well-funded campaigns involving top experts. They followed Fawcett's presumed route, hoping to find at least some clues. The rescuers discovered Dead Horse Camp, but the trail ended there. The search in the Green Labyrinth was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Rescue expeditions faced the same logistical and natural challenges. Many researchers who set out to search for the colonel got lost in the jungle themselves. Casualties among the rescuers began to rise alarmingly with each new attempt. The Amazon claimed new lives, turning the search into a deadly endeavor. It became clear that finding specific people in these forests was practically impossible. Fawcett's story gave rise to numerous rumors and outright hoaxes in the press. People came forward claiming to have seen a white man deep in the forests. Newspapers published fake interviews and fabricated stories of miraculous rescues. These publications only fueled public interest and encouraged new daredevils to take risks. The legend of the lost city of Z began to generate profits for publishers. The Brazilian government eventually banned unauthorized search expeditions to the region. Too many resources were being spent on rescuing the rescuers themselves from the impassable swamps. The area where Fawcett was believed to have disappeared was declared off-limits to inexperienced travelers. This decision put an official end to the mass attempts to find the British explorers' remains. The jungle finally closed its secrets to prying eyes. The name Percy Fawcett became synonymous with fearlessness and a fatal obsession with an idea. His training methods were studied in surveying schools as an example of bold planning. At the same time, his mistakes served as a harsh lesson for future generations of explorers. The main conclusion was that nature must not be underestimated or ignored. The colonel's stubbornness became a textbook example of a loss of objective control. For many decades, it was believed that Fawcett had simply gone mad from the heat. Academic science continued to insist that the Amazon had never been inhabited. The theory of lost cities was considered a beautiful but utterly unscientific fairy tale. South American history textbooks remained unchanged, rejecting the very possibility of civilization's existence. The Colonel's vindication seemed irretrievably lost in the muddy swamps. Memories of the expedition survived only in archives and adventure novels. Belongings, compasses, and diaries remained buried somewhere beneath a layer of rotting leaves. The scale of human loss was enormous, but the result was zero. At least, that is what the entire enlightened world believed for a century. The truth patiently awaited the emergence of entirely new technologies. The breakthrough came at the beginning of the 21st century, thanks to the development of new technologies. Archaeologists gained access to powerful laser scanning systems capable of mapping the Earth's surface. These systems, known as LiDARs, were mounted on aircraft and drones. They allowed researchers to penetrate the dense jungle canopy, creating an accurate three-dimensional model of the terrain. The technology completely eliminated the main obstacle, the impenetrable vegetation of the Amazon. A scan of the Mato Grosso region yielded results that shocked the modern scientific community. Perfectly symmetrical geometric shapes hidden beneath the ground appeared on the monitor screens. Lasers revealed the remains of enormous man-made mounds, canals, and deep ditches. These structures were too regular to be ordinary natural formations. The scale of the discoveries boggled the imagination of even the most conservative researchers. Archaeologists saw in the images an entire network of settlements connected by straight, wide roads. The roads stretched for tens of kilometers, cutting through the jungle along mathematically precise vectors. Around the settlements, complex systems of agricultural terraces and artificial ponds were discovered. It was a developed infrastructure capable of feeding tens of thousands of people. The jungle truly concealed the remains of a highly organized and complex society. The map of the discovered sites coincided remarkably with the records in an old Portuguese manuscript. The locations of the mountains, rivers, and man-made embankments matched those very landmarks. Fawcett was not crazy and was not chasing a mere mirage. His calculations and conclusions, made at the beginning of the 20th century, turned out to be strikingly accurate. The Colonel was looking for exactly what actually existed in this territory. These discoveries completely overturned established notions about the history of South America. The academic community had to acknowledge its past mistakes and rewrite textbooks. The Amazon was no longer considered a virgin forest, untouched by human hands. It turned out that a large-scale and advanced civilization had flourished here before the arrival of Europeans. The lost city of Z was not just a legend, but a historical fact. The fate of Fawcett's expedition itself remained a mystery until the very end. Researchers speculate that he may have passed very close to the ancient ruins. Perhaps he stood right on the overgrown mounds, unable to make them out beneath a thick layer of vegetation. Without remote sensing technology, it was practically impossible to see these objects from the ground. The Colonel's obsession was ahead of the technological capabilities of his era. The scale of the discoveries revealed just how little we knew about our own planet. Cold, hard data from laser radar confirmed what Fawcett had given his life for. His tragic retreat and defeat took on a completely new, triumphant meaning. He turned out to be a prophet whose ideas were confirmed only nearly a century later. The long-term effect of his expedition manifested itself in a shift in the scientific paradigm. Today, the ruins in Mato Grosso are being actively studied by international teams of archaeologists. Each new expedition brings data on the complex social organization of the ancient inhabitants. Fawcett's legacy lies not in the gold he found, but in the proven truth. His journey from certainty to collapse became the prelude to a great discovery. The Green Labyrinth has finally revealed its greatest secrets to humanity. Fawcett's story has become a classic example of the clash between human ambition and the laws of nature. His rigorous military training and precise instruments proved powerless against the vastness of the jungle. The 1925 expedition demonstrated the limits of physical endurance for an isolated group of people. It was a brutal experiment in survival in an utterly hostile environment. The lessons of this expedition have become permanent fixtures in safety guidelines for travelers. Every stage of this drama unfolded according to the strict rules of logistical collapse. The loss of supplies led to starvation, and the loss of compasses led to disorientation. A failure in a single element of the system instantly brought down the entire carefully constructed plan. Fawcett tried to control the chaos with orders, but the chaos proved stronger. The structure of the expedition collapsed under the weight of insurmountable external circumstances. Interest in this story hasn't waned even a century after the tragedy. Writers and filmmakers continue to analyze the motives that drove the British surveyor. His image has transformed from that of a simple soldier into a symbol of the indomitable human spirit. Fawcett became the embodiment of an era when there were still blank spots on the maps. His disappearance is shrouded in the romance of exploration and the bitterness of a fatal mistake. Modern researchers continue to analyze the Colonel's diaries and letters. They search for hidden clues that might shed light on the expedition's final days. Every line is studied for geographical landmarks and descriptions of the terrain. The archives of the Royal Geographical Society still hold many unsolved mysteries. The story of the lost city of Z continues to live on in academic articles and debates. Technology has allowed us to see what Fawcett was searching for while sitting in safety. We can view ancient cities on our computer screens in comfort, but it was his initial risk-taking that drew attention to this region of the world. Without his obsession and his tragedy, the laser scanning might never have taken place. He paid the ultimate price for the information we possess today. The tragedy of Fawcett's expedition serves as a reminder of the fragility of human life far from civilization. Even the most advanced equipment of the time could not protect people from the elements. The Amazon's wilderness remains as ruthless and indifferent as it was a century ago. This vast green expanse continues to dictate its own terms to anyone who dares to enter. Respect for the power of nature is the main lesson to be drawn from this historical drama. This story teaches us that the truth is often hidden behind a thick veil. Fawcett was right about the main thing. A civilization in the jungle did indeed exist. His mistake lay only in his assessment of his own strength and the capabilities of his equipment. He challenged the labyrinth and became an integral part of it forever. His name is forever inscribed in the history of geographical discoveries in South America. The true scale of his contribution became clear only with the passage of time. The cold facts of modern research have confirmed the British explorer's fervent belief. What do you think of the story of Percy Fawcett's expedition and his search for the lost city? Be sure to subscribe to the channel to be the first to see new documentary investigations.